Hey, hey.
Opened it up.
Yep, open it up. So I see that Ramses is under attendees. I'm gonna bump him up to panelist.
Hey, everybody, thanks for joining. Look
Hey,
at
everybody. We're gonna give it a couple of minutes and let everybody else kind of trickle in, and then we'll get started. I don't know, probably 2 minutes or so.
Look at that. We got our colors reversed today. Look at you over there wearing red. I told you I was
Wow.
converting you to the dark side.
Wasn't gonna do it when I was ordering it. I was like, man, I can't let Trey ever see me wear this red shirt. Got some more people trickling in. We'll do about a minute.
Fun workshop today. This one's always a good one. Plus, we're on a whole new lab platform now. Super excited about that. Works so much better. For those that have joined in already, have you guys all received an email from no reply at CoreStack with your lab invite link? If not, please let us know so we can get you sorted out.
Alrighty. Well, that I'm showing 2 minutes past, so won't make everybody else wait for everyone to trickle in. So I say we could go ahead and get started. So hi everybody, thank you for joining the workshop today. We will be talking about how to weaponize and operationalize Sigma rules for your detections. So with that, hi, I am Tyler Casey. I'm the lead detection engineer over here at SCYTHE and the deputy of SCYTHE Labs. I have about 10 years of experience doing DCO, defensive cyber operations. Currently, I run the blue or defensive side of our purple team engagements, and I'm responsible for a lot of the threat emulations and the subsequent detections that we put out with all of our threats every month. Before coming to SCYTHE, I was on a CPT, which is a protection team, where I deployed, internationally for instant response and targeted threat hunting. I have my socials here on the page. If anybody wants to connect, I would love to chat.
And hi, hello, I am Trey, everybody. I'm the lead red team engineer, I guess you could say adversarial engineer over here at SCYTHE Labs. I have a pretty extensive background, 15 plus years in cyber IT as a whole, doing everything from blue teaming with my man Tyler Casey up here to doing dedicated time red teaming, working with ICS and critical infrastructure, doing threat hunting, anything and everything you could think of. I've done a lot of content creation on Hack the Box Academy as well as here with SCYTHE and everywhere in between. If you care about alphabet soup, you can find a lot of mine down there on the slide, and my socials are down there if you'd like to connect.
15 years, getting up there, man.
Yeah, I'm earning this grade right here.
Yeah, for sure. Say an honorable mention. We have Ramses on the call as well, or on the workshop as well. He's going to be here to support us. So if you guys have any questions or issues or anything that comes up, please shoot it to us in the chat to one of us or to the hosts and panelists. Alrighty. If you have not done so already, please go ahead and start your lab entitlement by clicking on the quick launch URL link that you should have received in your email. It should have gone to whatever email you utilized to register for the workshop. It can take a little bit to load, so we just want to get it out of the way now. The workshop or the lab environment should be up for 4 or 5 hours, so it'll be up for longer than the workshop is available today. So you'll be able to work on some stuff if you have anything afterwards. If you did not get an email or you didn't get your URL, please let us know so we can update that and get you a link.
So real quick for payment, it's showing me that you already, oh, there you go. Good message. All good, Tyler.
Sweet. Okay. Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about Sigma, Sigma rules, Sigma detections, things like that. We're going to talk about why we care about it. We're going to talk about how to create a standard Sigma rule. We're going to translate that rule into something actionable, and then we're going to execute some adversary emulations that will then test our detections to make sure that our detections actually work how we think they're going to. For this workshop, we have about 30 or 45 minutes worth of slides, and then we're going to jump into the lab for the rest of the time. So not super intense on having to listen to Trey and I talk. So that should be a lot of fun for everybody. It should be mostly focused on the labs and getting into the rules, translating them, curating our rules, things like that, testing our detections. Again, everyone should have received a link from CoreStack. If you don't, please let us know as soon as you identify that you don't have one, so we can go ahead and shoot you over one. All right. So what is Sigma? Sigma, or I guess before we start, is anyone familiar with Sigma or has utilized it before or currently utilizes it in your detection process?
So if you have, just throw a thumbs up in chat or something.
Yes, but organization is too old school to use. Okay. All right. That kind of speaks to a little bit of what we're going to talk about, and some people set in their own ways. That's a very good piece that you threw in, Tommy. Thank you for that. Yeah, so Sigma is an open source structured format that's utilized for writing detections. It's written in YAML, and then Sigma HQ is kind of the creator, owner, you know, maintainer of the Sigma project. And on their GitHub page, they house, I don't know, a couple thousand community detections for us to utilize. You can also do pull and push requests to their GitHub if you want to throw in your own Sigma rules and kind of update the community on what you see as well. So in this workshop, we are essentially going to do what the infographic here is showing. We're going to take a Sigma rule, we're going to convert it, then we're going to deploy it into our SIEM and test to see if it works or not. So it should be pretty straightforward. All right. Before we jump into Sigma and making detections, let's talk about why the Sigma project exists and why we're here to talk about it. So in my experience, I said about 10 years of doing DCO, defensive cyber operations, detection sharing and query sharing is just not very good. Detections are often created by analysts in a silo with little to no collaboration, and then the detections that you create typically stay with that same analyst, and they're not shared with anybody. It stays in your notepad or in your OneNote and never goes anywhere else. I've been on threat hunting missions where I'll see analysts hunting for the adversary, creating detections, creating queries, getting actionable results, and then just not saying anything about it at all. We'll do a hot wash at the end of the day and be like, hey, what did everybody see? Anything to share? And silence, crickets, right? Nobody wants to share what they've come up with for whatever reason. They want to just keep it all to themselves. And that's even on a pretty close internal team. And as you expand out as far as external detection sharing, you might see some detections inside of CTI that you're looking for or in a blog post, but those are also typically written in whatever SIEM language that analyst or that company uses, or their proprietary language or interface, or something like that, and you would have to try and manually translate it anyway. This is not a great way to do it, right? Everyone having their own way of writing rules, having their own format, keeping it all to themselves. It's cumbersome. It's manually intensive to translate it, and overall, it's just not great. But by utilizing Sigma, utilizing the Sigma project, you can have a centralized detection repository that's all written in a single standard format that is tool agnostic, and it solves a lot of these detection sharing shortfalls that I was talking about a minute ago, right? And that's what Sigma brings to the table, and that's why I really enjoy it. I really enjoy using it. I love to talk about it and kind of spread the good word that is Sigma. Having the standard format to be able to share with everyone is really, really valuable, and it saves a lot of time, right? So Sigma HQ's GitHub is the central repo for currently published Sigma rules. Like I said, you can submit your own rules to Sigma HQ for them to be published, and then those would then be accessible by everyone else who has access to the GitHub page, which is everybody because it's open. Even if you're not able to share all of your rules with Sigma HQ, or you don't want to upload them to their GitHub or do a push request to their GitHub, that's still okay. You can still keep an internal repo that's accessible within your organization or whatever your sphere of influence is, and that will allow for multiple people, multiple analysts, and maybe even different departments to contribute and access all of the detection rules that you have, providing more of a one-stop shop for detections as opposed to keeping all of them in a OneNote or in an Excel document or something like that. And then over to having a standard format, that just means that you should get the same results every time that you run it, right? Someone should be able to take your detection rule written in Sigma, and without any other additional context, they should be able to translate it, understand what it's doing, and employ it in their searches without you having to provide additional context or answer any additional questions. So it's a lot faster. It's a repeatable standard format that everybody can use. And then it's like it says, Sigma rules are able to be converted to essentially any security tool that has a query bar, whether that's your EDR solution or your SIEM, uh, Splunk, CrowdStrike, Sentinel, whatever it is. If it has a query bar, you should be able to just translate your rule into that tool's specific language, right? Which makes it a lot easier if you're working with multiple agencies, or even if your own if your own security stack has multiple tools, you should be able to translate your detections into whatever it is that you need to use.
And this is
Um,
I
yeah,
would say
Trey.
this is something I would keep in mind, everyone. This is really kind of touching on that community piece that we're always talking about. We're all facing these same threats. So in reality, if we can help each other out and lower the bar when it comes to detecting bad, why wouldn't we do it, right? And up to this point, this has been the best way that we've seen that you can do it. So we really like sharing it out with you guys and with the world.
Yeah, for sure. I see that we see a question here. Would you recommend using detect prior to writing Sigma rules? That way you can clearly map your coverages. Yeah, that's one way that you can kind of utilize it, or kind of frame out what you want to have your detections on. We're talking a little bit kind of like the building blocks to where you would form detections. But yeah, utilizing detect to kind of map out what you're concerned with and what you're trying to find is a great like precursor to building your detections for sure. All right. Now I'm kind of off my soapbox of what kind of the shortfalls are in our detection community, cybersecurity community. Let's get kind of more into the Sigma roles here. So this is just a screenshot of the Sigma HQ's GitHub. Again, where it hosts all of their roles. It has a search function at the top, so you're able to quickly kind of go in there and find rules that are pertinent to you. They also offer another site called detection.fyi, which is a great resource for Sigma or detection rules. It's just a little more UI friendly. It doesn't have that minimalist feel of GitHub for people that like things that aren't just text based, right? It's going to take a. Oh, 1 second. There we go. So I was just going to pivot over and show you the Sigma HQ real quick and the detection.fyi and this other attack rule mapping that we just came across the other day. So I dropped the link for the Sigma HQ in the chat over there, but it's really just as simple as if you know what you're looking for, like in that example, we were looking for 7-zip, just go right up at the top, type in 7-zip, and here's all the rules that reference 7-zip, right? You could even do attack codes or T codes. So 1059, which is process creation. Think via like PowerShell, CMD, Bash, things like that. So you can even just look up T codes and see things related to that inside of the GitHub. Normally, you can just go into rules. They're all categorized by the different categories or operating system, things like that. So if you know that you're looking for a Windows detection for PowerShell or whatever, you can just kind of drill down that way and find it. They made it very simple to kind of dig through. Most of the time, I just do a keyword search at the top, right? I probably already know what I'm looking for. You could just type it in at the top. And then over to detection.fyi, which posts or is mapped to essentially all the rules that they have on Sigma HQ's GitHub, as well as like as a few other places. So over here, the same. You could just do a search for 7-zip, and all the rules come up. It's just a little bit nicer of a format if you don't really like, again, that minimalist view of GitHub. You can see it. Anything else that it is related to, the references, things like that. Very, very useful. And then the last one that I'll show is this attack rule map. This is something that I came across just a few days ago, and I think it is super, super neat and very interesting. So it maps all the atomic red team tests to Sigma rules as well as Splunk rules if they're applicable, and it has them correlated by T codes. So if you know that you're looking for, I already see it, T 1003, you can just look by T code for things that you're concerned with, and it has the rules right here. You could just pop them out. It takes you right to it. Again, back to that Sigma HQ GitHub. Very useful. Just a really good one-stop shop. And if you're using Splunk, which is what we're going to be using in our lab, they have some Splunk rules already set up over here that will take you to their detection page for it. So just a couple of resources for you guys on that. So it should be, there we go. There we go. Yeah, so we'll be utilizing those 3 pages when we get into the lab to curate some Sigma rules that we'll then deploy and test out how they work and see if our detections will catch our emulations or not. All right. Okay, so we went over, again, my little soapbox on detection sharing, my experience with it. We went over where you can find or curate some Sigma rules, those 3 sites on there. So now we'll get into the how we can create a standard rule and how to read and parse them. Sigma is a lot like that image that you have there with like, I made this, I give it to you, you can use it, and it's great. And you can add to it, comment on it, expand on it, things like that. So we're going to get into the weeds a little bit in this workshop of exactly what all of these fields and tags are. So before we get too deep into it, we'll view it from that 1,000-eye view, that 1,000-foot view of a Sigma rule itself. So to do that, we have a relatively simple Sigma rule here, just again to give us a frame of reference into what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the time. So in this rule, if you look down at the detection section of it, you can see that this rule is designed to detect DLL files that are downloaded via the invoke web request commandlet in PowerShell, which is an alias to wget. So someone trying to download a DLL via PowerShell, right? So again, focusing in on that detection section, we can see that for our detection to hit, it has to contain either invoke web request or IWR, which is just a shorthand alias for invoke web request in the command line, and it also must contain HTTP out file and DLL. So both of those parameters have to hit. I would say you could probably even add to this rule a little bit, and maybe under the detection for command line also include wget or some other PowerShell commandlets or curl, something like that to expand it out even further. But again, the point of this is just kind of to show you a Sigma rule if you've never seen one, just to have a bit of a frame of reference into what we're going to be talking about here for the next maybe 30 minutes or so. Does anybody have any questions on this rule so far, or any questions in general? Nothing seen. 1 second, it just got really hot in my house. I gotta turn the AC on. All right.
It's above 20 there today.
Yeah, whatever. Trey's down. Well, Trey and Ramses are down in Florida. They're used to it being 1,000 degrees. Oh, it's got to cool off a little bit. All right. No questions seen, so we'll go ahead and move on. All right. So back into the rules, back into how to create some indicators, things like that. Or excuse me, how to create some detections, things like that. We want to create our detections based off of indicators, whether that indicator is going to be CTI, logs that we have, or just our experience, or like Tommy had pointed out, maybe using detect prior to it to kind of frame or orient ourselves into what we're going to be looking for. So the first indicator that we're going to talk about or go over is CTI, which is cyber threat intelligence. Some of you guys might have an intelligence shop or a CTI shop inherent to your organization. If so, that's great. They should be able to generate some CTI reports to shoot over to you for you to develop your threat plan and your detections off of that. On the cyber protection team, but towards the end of it, what we would do prior to going out on missions and creating our detections is our intelligence analyst, our CTI analyst, would basically create a threat plan of what we're most concerned with, like the most dangerous courses of action and the most likely courses of action. And we would take that CTI report and kind of we would build detections off of what we are concerned with, which is essentially what we're going to be doing here with the CTI pieces. So for your CTI, you want it to be actionable intelligence, so we can make a detection. We can make a detection out of it. Optimally, your CTI would have specific commands or behaviors or indicators into them, so then we can later create an emulation that we will test against our system to make sure that detection hit, right? So in this snippet over here, we have a Lockbit ransomware indicators that came from a CISA advisory. These indicators show that the Lockbit threat actors are enabling admin login via the registry keys. So utilizing this little snippet, we could create a detection, a Sigma rule that would look for these registry value modifications and their associated values. So an example of that, like we would look at if the registry key contains this software Microsoft Windows current version Win login, and it also contains the value of auto admin login, and the value of the data is 1, we want an alert off of that. So utilizing essentially the fields and the values is how we're going to create our Sigma rules. And then speaking of CTI, these are just some great places where you can find some quality free CTI, which is the best price to get CTI. We use these resources all the time. Normally start my workday off with looking at the InfoSec Ninjas start.me page, and most of these resources that we have linked are already embedded into that page. So it really creates a very useful kind of one-stop shop for your CTI. And all of these resources put out great stuff, and they have current reporting. So if you're not sure where you can pull your CTI from to create your indicators, again, this InfoSec Ninjas start.me page is a great place to start.
And there's a lot of gold here too, just on this one slide. If you're looking for general resources for updates on what's happening from a threat perspective in the world right now, you really can't go wrong with those top three. The new CISA alerts and advisories, the stuff they've been putting out over the last 2 years has been just downright amazing. We use it consistently. It's always good, it's always detailed and very useful, regardless if you're a defender or someone on the offensive side trying to emulate these actions. The same can be said for D4Report and Google Tag.
Yeah, for sure. But say if you don't know where to find CTI or find indicators, this is a great place to start, and for free. All right, back over to the indicators. So we went over CTI, how you would kind of use those. Yes, Jeffrey, I'll provide those links um, out to you. So you can get your indicators from CTI. That essentially is if you're looking to find something before you know it happens, right? So if you see in the CTI that Lockbit, you're worried about Lockbit ransomware, you go look up some indicators for how the Lockbit ransomware actors do certain actions, and you could test to see if that occurs in your environment. Another way to do it, that's kind of going in like not blind, but not knowing if you're going to get results. So this way, utilizing your logs is a great way to go in. You know that the results are there, and you can essentially build your detections off of that and test if they work inherently. So by running threat emulations or purple team engagements, it's a great way to generate logs that will emulate adversary behavior. Of course, you can perform live incident response, and that's the best way to get adversary logs. So maybe if you do a live incident response, you can save those logs off and put them in your lab environment or something like that to then test some future rules off of. But if you don't want to mess with that live data or wait until you get breached, sticking with the threat emulation or purple team engagements is a perfectly good way to do it. Right. So either way, you can parse through your logs and find things that you would like to be able to detect, and it will also provide you an opportunity to see if these behaviors are being logged. Um, so in this example, we see that our sysmon log here has an entry of PowerShell creating a network connection. This could be something that is or should hopefully be something that is pretty abnormal in your network. So you could create a Sigma rule, a detection that would trigger off of if a network connection is created by the image of PowerShell, or to expand on that, image of PowerShell, CMD, curl, things like that. Images or applications or binaries that have a lot of living off the land ability. You typically don't want them to reach out to the internet. But even if that is common in your network for PowerShell to reach out to the internet, it should really only be reaching a few sites. So like, Microsoft.com, cdn.microsoft, things like that. So you could add those exclusions into your Sigma rule. So then if it does hit off of those sites that it is fine for it to go to, you don't get a bunch of false positives on it. Excuse me. All right. And then, oh, that. And then the last indicator source that we're going to talk about is your experience, right? You can use your experience as a starting point for conducting research to find indicators, or just kind of going in blind, going in off of what you think is important to create these detections or these rules. So if you know from experience, or maybe from reading reports or doing incident response, being a DCO analyst, you know that a concerning threat vector is embedded PowerShell inside of a productivity application. So embedded PowerShell via, a macro or a link or something like that inside of Word or PowerPoint, Excel, something like that. So a user gets sent a Word document, they open it, it spawns PowerShell. You can create a detection off of that, right? You know that shouldn't be happening. You know that is a common way that adversaries will go in to get a foothold, via a phishing email or something like that. So you can build a detection off of that. And then once you have your detection, you're utilizing it, maybe you think to yourself, well, why does it stop with a Word document, right? What else would an adversary use? Adversary could use something like Teams or Excel, Google Docs, some other productivity application, Adobe PDFs, things like that. So you could add in those parent images or images to your detection as well. And then kind of over time, and as you tune your rules and test them, and new CTI comes in, you gather some more experience, you'll end up with a pretty succinct detection that will essentially alert you to any kind of suspicious PowerShell parent process. Which, if you guys have been on any of our other webinars or Threat Thursday lives, we always talk about suspicious PowerShell parent processes. It is the number one way to easily find the bad guy. If you're seeing PowerShell spawning from something that isn't in program files or isn't, or something that isn't sorry, something that isn't program files or some kind of known application where PowerShell should be coming from, it's a great way to find the adversary because they want to live off the land and run PowerShell. If you see PowerShell running off of a temp or off of a Word document located inside your temp directory, I got bad news for you, buddy. So it's a great way to just build off of your experiences and the things that you see to create better detections, better rules that fit your environment. Before we get into the Sigma fields, does anybody have any questions on the indicator sources? I saw that Trey put the CTI links in the comments or in the chat. All right, nothing seen over there. All right, so we went through, we found some indicators that we want to create detections off of, whether we went through our CTI or we looked through our logs and found something suspicious, or you just had a thought that like, hey, I want to build a detection for, that abnormal PowerShell child process or something like that. So we have our indicators, our information. So now we'll switch over to the actual rule creation itself. So Sigma rules are pretty straightforward, but they do have a lot of required fields inside of them. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, like title, ID, things like that. But some of them require a little more nuance, and we'll dig deeper into those. They'll have their own dedicated slide here in a little bit. So some of the fields I do want to call out are, excuse me. Some of the fields I do want to call out are the title, ID, status, description, references, and author. So quick note on some of these, your rules under status, your rules will start as experimental. They don't upgrade to test or stable or anything like that until months of active use, other people going through it, really making sure that this rule will only detect on or that this rule will detect on what it says it will with limited false positives, right? So when you first create a rule, you're going to leave it as experimental, again, until it's peer reviewed and several months go by, right? And then the next part that I want to really hit on is that you don't want to start your title with the word detects. I know that sounds kind of silly, but you want your title to be short and succinct, just a couple of words like 7-zip compression or suspicious PowerShell parent process, something like that. You want to save the text and your lengthy description for the description piece. Your title should only be a few words. And then more fields. So some more fields we have are date, tags, log source, detection, false positives, and level. So the fields that have an asterisk next to them are the more nuanced ones I was talking about that have their own slide. We'll go over those next. And some fields on here that I do want to talk about quickly are the false positives and the level fields. So some examples for a false positive would be like administrators may use this command for server maintenance, updates, troubleshooting, etc., right? Or end users installing software. Or if you're not sure what the false positive would be, you just put unknown, and that's fine too. You're like, I'm not sure what would trigger this rule outside of my detection. You just put unknown, and as you find different things, you can always update it, add it to it. If it's in the GitHub HQ, other people can put their false positives in there as well. So you just want to list out things that people can look for or maybe exclude. I like to think of the false positives kind of as like a catch-all. I think of Sigma rules the same way as reporting, where you want to have as much information as possible in your rule so people don't ask you questions about it. You want to think about why someone would ask you a question and already have it answered in your rule. So I don't want someone reaching back out to me like, hey, I'm getting false positives on this because we use PowerShell to install XYZ. Like, okay, well, that's in the false positives already. So it's already identified, and people are able to kind of do it a little more on their own without having to ask you additional questions or ask for additional context, right? And then over to the levels. Your levels are going to be informational, low, or medium, um, or excuse me. Your levels of information, low or medium, are really just for suspicious activity or policy violations. So likely they'll have some false positives and should be investigated, but they shouldn't set off any immediate alarms. They don't need a dedicated alert or anything like that. It's just something that you should be aware of. And then over to the high and critical levels, those are high fidelity alerts that should have a dedicated alert. You should get an email about it. You should get a push notification. You need to be alerted to a higher critical detection as soon as it happens. A higher critical detection should have very low false positives and should spawn an investigation, right? So if you're unsure of where your rule should fall, I say always just put it at lower medium. Is that, again, those high and critical ones should really be enough to trigger an investigation as soon as you get a hit, right? They should be high fidelity. If this happens to you, it's bad news, right? Anybody have any questions off of some of the fields that we've gone over? We're going to get more into the tags, log source, and detection in these next couple slides. Yeah,
So
they're all pretty.
you're killing it.
Say they're all pretty straightforward. This workshop should be a pretty straightforward workshop. But if anybody has any questions at any time, please chime in and let us know. All right, over to tags. So one of the standard fields that Sigma has is tagging. So the most common tags are attack, MITRE attack, CAR, CVEs, and TLP. And then indicated on the screen here is how they're written inside of the Sigma rules. So first up is attack, which again is the MITRE attack framework. Is everybody familiar with the MITRE attack framework and tactics and techniques? T codes, things like that. Is everybody familiar with that? Edward says yes. Edward, we're good then. I assume that Jeffrey has some experience. Okay, so MITRE attack is, again, it covers the tactics, techniques, and softwares that are utilized by threat actors, or what they call groups. It's very robust and can really assist in painting the whole picture of what's happening. The MITRE attack tag is the most common tag that I see in pretty much every rule. So in this example here, we have APT 29, which MITRE attack refers to as G0016. Again, they call them groups in MITRE attack, so it's G and then a number. So they see APT 29, G0016, conducting discovery. Discovery is the tactic. They are utilizing the remote system discovery technique, which is T1018, and they're utilizing Bloodhound, which is that software 0521. So you can utilize these tags, especially the MITRE tags, to quickly kind of speak about what that detection rule, like where it was seen or why an adversary might utilize it. Again, it just provides more context and kind of writes its own story of what is happening without people having to ask you questions or ask you for more context. They're able to go in and research, like, oh, this attack technique or this detection rule should hit on discovery tactics or lateral movement or utilizing Bloodhound, things like that. And then the next up is the CAR, which is the Cyber Analytic Repository, which is also housed by MITRE, I believe. But inside of that, they contain a pseudocode of the query, so kind of like a plain text way to, or a plain layman's terms way to explain how you would look for this activity. So in this example, the analytic tag is letting us know that bits admin was utilized to download a file. Maybe that file was the Bloodhound executable, and we could combine this tag with our tags from attack again to create more of a picture, more of a whole story of what the adversary is doing. And then if oh, I'll drop the link to the CAR if you guys aren't familiar with that. It does a great job of, again, just kind of like a pseudocode layman's terms of of a of an analytic or of a detection story into what an adversary is doing or how they could utilize that. And then next up is CVEs, which is common vulnerability and exposures. This will essentially provide a list of vulnerabilities that affect operating systems, software, anything IT related, anything that gets an IP address. If it has a vulnerability, it is reported up through CVE, where you can then learn more about that vulnerability. So in this example, it is a vulnerability in Bloodhound. Kind of see how all of these are going together to form a story. So it's a vulnerability in Bloodhound that allows for the execution of operating system commands. So based off the tags we know so far, maybe we could think that a threat actor, APT 29, also known as G0016, exploited this vulnerability in Bloodhound, which is tagged as S0521 for software, to run commands. And then we're able to combine these multiple different tags from multiple different places to provide a story of what this detection is kind of based around and what it's designed to find, right? Again, just more context, more information, being verbose in a way that we're really just reusing what other people have already documented on, right? You probably found this information reading through CTI or Googling or things like that. So it's just really listing out your references in another way. And then the last tag that I'm going to talk about is the TLP, which is the traffic light protocol. This is used to set the disclosure level, which will essentially tell you who you are allowed to share the information with. So it's a TLP red, amber, green, or clear. Red is no further disclosure, individual recipients only. So like direct email to email or print and given to you, don't give it to anyone else. Amber is a limited disclosure, a need to know. Green is limited disclosure within your community. If the community is not defined, you can assume that it means the cybersecurity community. And then clear means disclosure to anyone. So send it to whoever you want. All of the rules that you find on Sigma HQ should either be clear or green, right? If you see one that's amber or red, someone made a mistake. Those should really just be housed in your internal agency. They shouldn't be sent out to anybody else. And then with the tags, you don't need to feel pressured to apply a tag from each of these sources or to have 20 tags in there. Most often, I just see the attack tags, and sometimes they'll list the CVE in it, but most of the time it's just the MITRE attack tags. I believe that most recently they have actually gone in and updated the tagging to include some additional sources such as detect and things like that. Actually, this in here, and then in here, attack or Sigma does a great job of providing documentation or examples of how they want things formatted or done. So I just dropped the link for the Sigma tag page that they have, which again talks about all the ones that I talked about. It got some extra ones added in here like defend, detection, STP, and it goes into how exactly you can label these and utilize these and some additional sources as well. It has defend here. That's when was this last updated? In August of last year. So a couple months ago, it was updated to include some more of these, just showing that they constantly are updating and evolving, like this tactics with harden, detect, isolate, evict, things like that. All that's new. So definitely check that out. I'll have some additional references for their other tags or other fields and such as we go. And then with that, the next one up is the log source field. So the log source field is just where you can expect to see this at, right? They have common subfields of product, category, and service. And Sigma HQ refers to these as the Sigma taxonomy, which is a system of classification. I had to Google that, so I figured I would throw it in so everybody else could know too. So in that, your product is most of the time going to be either your operating system, your appliance, or your tool. Your category could be something like the action that's occurring, such as your process creation or network connection, something like that. Your services could be a literal service like syslog, FTP, something like that, or a service that is provided, such as CloudTrail, um, such as CloudTrail or any other AWS, GCP, Azure services. I can't think of what their logging is called, but it could be either, again, a service like a literal service or a service that is provided that you pay for, or a protocol service such as HTTP or DNS. Again, with this, I'm going to recommend the easiest way to do it is just to reference the documentation that they have. So on there, just drop the link for that one in there as well. Inside of the Sigma taxonomy, they have it broken down by the log sources here. It has examples of how they look. So if it's a Ruby on Rails, this is what the log source is going to look like. For all the main cloud providers, Linux, Mac, Zeek, formerly known as Bro, and then into Windows, which is the most verbose. There's more Windows rules and Windows documentation than anything else because that's what most people use, right? But they have additional log sources in there that could apply to your specific technology or operating system that you guys utilize in your environments. And then the last kind of standard that I'm going to talk about is less of a rule and more of what they call a soft convention that is utilized for file management in the repo. So it's important to name your files in the same kind of standard convention that they have, just so it's easier to find, right? When I first started making Sigma rules, my file names were terrible, right? It was like sysmon underscore PowerShell. Like it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't provide you any additional context. So the easiest way to do it that I find, it typically goes category or service underscore your product underscore and then the action. And I have just some examples listed out there of how we use them. So like process creation on Windows, utilizing 7-zip to dump the files. Really, the only part that's kind of up to interpretation in this is the action piece. The first two can really be derived from your rule itself, because your rule will list out the category and the service and what product it is. So the only one that you'll have to kind of make your own really is the action. I'll drop the link for that in there as well, and just kind of pivot over to it. Yes, in the file name conventions, they have based off what product you use, the pattern, and the examples. The same for category, services, Windows and Linux, things like that. Again, the easiest way is just to reference the documentation. Oh, sorry about that. Does anyone have any questions on the fields?
Trust us, we know it's a bit of a fire hose, but it'll make sense in a minute. There's like
I'll
4
make
slides, then it's all
yeah.
out.
Yeah, I feel like in this one we're always like just trying to summit the mountain, right? It's like so much stuff, and then we get there, and then it's like, oh, here's the rule. Now it all kind of makes a lot more sense. But yeah, there's a lot of back before we get into it. So we have. Sorry, gotta update my presenter view. All right, so we know the fields. There we go. That's funny, Edward. We know the fields, we know the standards, we know how to write the file names. Let's kind of see it all together. So here is a rule that we have broken out that it is designed to detect 7-zip compressing a file with a password. This rule was provided by Frack113, who works for Sigma HQ. or who works for Sigma. Um, and then for those, if you've noticed, I did take the references piece out. It was just too big to fit on the slide. But on the actual rule, it'll have the references so you can list the documentation of where you found this in, maybe the CTI report or something like that, that you can have the references in. Again, just to provide more context. You don't want people having to come back to you and ask you questions, or I don't. Maybe you guys do, but I don't. Um, so in this rule is tagged with the tag T1560.001, which from this you can just do a quick Google off that and see that that is the tactic or technique for archiving collected data via a utility, which in this instance would be 7-zip. We know that based off of our rule, title and description. And then over to the log source, we see that this is meant to hit on a process creation on a Windows machine, so we can ascertain that it will more than likely exist in either your sysmon or security log, whatever logs you have that record process creation. And then the detection piece is looking for matches on 7-zip and command line parameters. We'll get into detail on that on the next slide. And then we can see that this rule could have false positives, since creating compressed files with a password could be common in your environment, right? So from just looking at this rule, it provides a lot of information. It has, well, imagine it has references in it that you can look and see what adversary used this in the CTI, right? But you can see what attack technique they utilize. You could even add the tag for software and include 7-zip as a software underneath it, just for even more context. You can see that it is designed to hit off of 7-zip being utilized to encrypt data, which is typically something an adversary would do prior to exfiltrating that information, right? They would stage everything, compress it, archive it, zip it up, and then extract it out so they can have it. So any questions on this rule? On the next slide, we're going to get into the detection logic itself. Is there any questions on anything outside of the detection piece? Okay, cool. We have a question from Tommy. I hope that I'm pronouncing that right, Tommy, or Tommy. Said, side note, should we create detections for name pipes or DLL injection type attacks, or should we rely on our EDR to detect those and focus our energy on low variance behaviors that are precursors to those behaviors? That is a great question. For me, it would just depend on what visibility you have in your logs. If you know that your logs cannot see named pipes or things injected into memory, it's really no use to write a rule off of it, unless you're writing your rule to prove that you can't see these in the logs. I am not a fan of relying on EDR to really do anything. Maybe that's just the threat, the threat hunter. I want to go and find the adversary. I don't want to rely on the EDR. So I would say, yeah, I would say it would just depend on what logs you are ingesting. However, if your EDR does alert you on, or your EDR does log like name pipes or process injection, in process memory injection, things like that, you can make a Sigma rule to detect off of it and just reference your EDR logs to then search for it. Okay, it is pronounced Tommy. Okay, good. Yeah, I would hate to mispronounce anyone's name. Okay, awesome. Parents misspelled it. That's hilarious. Okay. Any other questions? Or Trey, you got something?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and that's a great example about visibility when it comes to making detection rules. When you think about name pipes and what they're traditionally used for, that's like inter-service communications and potentially some network communications between endpoints and other services and things like that. So there's a high likelihood you can get a ton of false positives off of that. But at the same time, if you understand the behavior of your environment, the common processes, applications, things like that that you normally see doing this, it would be very easy to create a good detection referencing anything outside of the norm.
Yeah, for sure. Say, and now that you said that, I remember we updated one of our lab environments to our sysmon configuration to let us know when an image was loaded. So, an example of that for like the in-memory execution, you could have your detection look at if certain images are loaded into other processes, like for that memory injection. So, like if you see PowerShell being loaded into calc.exe or Notepad or something like that, that could be a great detection because you don't want this image to be loaded by calc, notepad, word, whatever. But yeah, it's really based on your visibility. Another great, this is a little bit leaving the sigma piece of it, but a great use of these detections and these rules is to see what visibility you have. So if you find a rule on Sigma HQ or on whatever that references named pipes or in-memory injection, you can convert it to your language, throw it in your SIEM or your EDR and see if you get any hits. And if you don't get any hits, there's no logs available, you know that that is a visibility gap, and you can then, reorient yourself, update your logs, your visibility, and then run the rule again and see if you get any hits. This is a little bit of a shameless plug to our Power to the Purple workshop if you guys want some more workshops here in a couple months. All right. So with that, we'll get over to the main piece of the rule. The most important part of the rule is your detection logic, right? If your detection logic is not good, you can have the best description in the world. It doesn't make a difference, right? You need your detection logic to be good and hit off what you want it to hit on. So here we'll just so from the previous rule, I just dissected the detection logic to look like this so we could kind of see it in an easier way because I know that we're going over a lot of stuff. So in this detection, we have a few filters. Actually, let me go back for a second. So if you look at the detection piece, you could see that it has detection, then it has like these field names. So selection image, selection password, selection action. And then under that, it has what the field is. So I shouldn't have called these ones field names. So selection image, password, and action are the conditions or groupings that need to be met. And then underneath them, they have the field names and then the value. So you can think of it in your SIEM, in your logs, in your wherever. If your description contains 7-zip or the image field contains any of these versions or the file name has these versions, you can think of it like field name or field and then the value of that field or the name of that field. And then some of these have what are they called? The pieces on the end, like the pipe contains, or they have pipe ends with or begins with modifiers. That's what they're called. Sorry, had a little brain fart there. But these modifiers at the end, what that will do is essentially just put wildcards or asterisks in there for you. So the contains will put an asterisk on either side of that named value. Ends with will put the asterisk at the front. So it's just a easier way, a less taxing way for your SIEM or EDR to do these searches because you don't want to just have asterisks all over everything, and you don't want to not have those wildcards in there and then miss something because you're too specific. Excuse me. And then down to it in the condition is what tells us what it needs to match on. So in a super hyper focused way, our in our detection, we have a few of those filters, that selection image, password, and action that I was talking about. Those are our filters. And then our condition down there at the bottom states that we are looking for a match of all of these selections. So what does that mean? The selection image piece of it here is looking for the description, the image, or the file name to be some form of 7-zip, right? We see that it has that the description contains, image ends with, original file name is this. It's looking for something to tell it that this is 7-zip. This is actually a really great piece of this rule that you don't see in a lot of other ones is that they have it looking in more than one spot. So typically you'll find that places are just looking for image contains or image ends with 7-zip or image ends with PowerShell, whatever it is. But if someone just renames it or recompiles it, it's not going to trigger off of that. So by having multiple different fields in there to look for, it really provides you a lot more fidelity into what's happening, because you could just copy 7z.exe, call it something else, and then it could bypass, some form of detection if your detection is too specific. So a little, yeah. So you don't want to be too specific. You want to keep it a little broad, which they do a great job here of covering like multiple bases, right? Multiple fields. So in this, at least one of these criteria have to hit for it to be a match or meet that condition. So let's imagine in our logs we have a hit on the image being 7z.exe. So our selection image is met. Perfect. We got one done. The next filter is selection password, which is looking for the command line string that contains -p. This has to be a match for us to meet the condition. So lucky for us, in our logs we have that -p. Can anyone tell me why there's a space before the -p? Or conversely, why there's spaces on either side of A or U in that selection action?
Does it depend on the placement of the command line parameters?
Kind of. So, with the -p before, where it has the contains modifier in it, that contains modifier is going to put asterisks on both sides of whatever is in the quote. So, like down where it has selection action A or U, if you didn't have the spaces on either side, it would just be wildcard A, wildcard. That is not a good detection. That means any word that has the letter A in it is going to meet that criteria. So some of these spaces are put in there or they should all be put in there on purpose. So that way the wild card is in the right spot. Because if you just put an asterisk next to A or U, or even the -p, like the -p could be like part of a command line, or a PowerShell commandlet, like get tech process or something like that. So if you can utilize the spaces to make a better detection to put those wildcards in the right spot. All right, so we have the first two are met, and then lastly we get to the selection action condition, which is looking for a command line string that contains either A or U, and then again with spaces on either side. And lucky for us, we have that in our logs. So by hitting all of these, we meet the condition of all of selection, and our rule will trigger someone executing 7-zip to create a password protected archive. And in a few slides, we're going to show you how this actually works and not just talk about it. But is there any questions on the detection logic? One that I want to point out is that even though this like selection image here has 3 different fields and values that it's looking for, um, they're all ors, right? It's not and for all of those. So I just wanted to point that out, that you can have ands or ors inside your statements to build a little bit more logic into it.
I would just stress too that you want to be as flexible as possible with these. You don't want to rely on just one of these specific pieces for your detection logic. And he kind of hit on it earlier with, say, the file name or renaming them and things like that. We all, if you've done any kind of pen testing or red teaming or played around in logs for a bit, you know that even some of the native executables in Windows can go by multiple names or be called in different ways. So like a great example there is net versus net1. Same exact thing, but it looks different on the command line. So if you're pushing super hard on, say, the original file name or image ends with net.exe, if it's ran net1, it bypassed the whole detection.
Mm.
So by including these other pieces like action or password or other contains, you're making it a more robust detection, and it's going to be more likely to be a valid detection, not a false positive or you missing something.
Yeah, for sure. But saying and that made me think of another example as well. If you're looking in the command line for arguments. If like someone is running, like you would mention the net command, like net use or whatever in the command line, and your detection is based off of that. If you have your detection look for net.exe in the command line, but they just put the word net in it, it's going to totally bypass it. So you don't want to be you don't want to be so specific and focused that you miss miss the action because of a minor change. Which brings us, I guess, to a larger issue of focusing on state-based detections as opposed to keyword detections, but that's for a different workshop. So we'll 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 move on before I go down that.
Yeah, it's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, so I know that that was a lot of kind of going over the rules, why they exist, how to read them, what they should look like, what they're going to hit on, detection logic, et cetera, et cetera. So now we're actually going to take a rule, we're going to translate it, we're going to put it in our SIEM, which is Splunk, and then see if we get any hits. We're going to use that same rule, that same 7-zip Sigma rule we were just looking at, and we're going to go ahead and translate it. So there are several different ways that you can translate it. The easiest way to do it is to use either uncoder.io, which is what you have here, sigconverter.io, which we'll show next, or utilize the CLI version of it. But either way, all you have to do is take your Sigma rule for uncoder.io, paste it on the left. You use the drop downs there to drop down to whatever SIEM or query or EDR solution that you're utilizing. For us, we're using Splunk, so we have Splunk over there on the right. And then you click translate, and it'll translate your rule from that Sigma rule to an actionable detection or query that you can just copy paste, throw into Splunk, and see if you get any hits. Similar for sigconverter.io. Sigconverter.io. Same or similar for sigconverter.io. Sigconverter is the official Sigma conversion tool that is maintained by Sigma HQ. I prefer to use it because it has a little more options, but utilize whichever one you would like. But a very similar concept, you just paste your rule into where it says rule.yaml. You select your backend, which is a drop down of multiple different sources. If you have a certain format, you can choose that or pipeline. So if you you know it's going to be in the sysmon log or in the security log, something like that, you can select that in the pipeline. It'll make your query a little more specific, but you don't have to. If you don't, it'll keep it broad, and then it'll automatically translate it inside the query. You just copy and paste it. If you want to utilize the CLI version to install it, is just that pip3 install sigma-cli command down there at the bottom, and then in the top right, it tells you how to actually run that command line argument if you're interested in that. But once you have your rule copied, then you go over to Splunk, you paste your rule in the search bar, and boom, detections. You found the bad guy, we did it, we won, let's get lunch, right? So you see, it's very simple to just go in, find the rule that you think is going to match you, or create a rule on your own, throw it in sigconverter or uncoder.io, get the translation, put it in Splunk, and then boom, you can see if your rule works or doesn't work. So in here, we can see that our 7-zip process spawned and was being utilized to create a password protected archive. We can also see in our search that our elite hacker man made some typos, so had to run the command several times. I think that was probably me. But even that brings up another good point, that if you do see that that typos in your logs or typos in CTI can also make for good detections as well. A lot of adversaries will run a automated or already scripted campaign, or will run even if they're going interactive on keyboard. A lot of times they utilize something called a click script, which is just a list of all the commands that they're going to run. So if they made a typo in it, they could have utilized that command over several different campaigns. So sometimes typos or things that seem awry or mistakes made by an adversary can make for good detections as well. They're just people behind a desk, just like we are. So that's just a little tidbit. One other note that we see in here is that Sigma roles don't know what indexes you have because everyone's index is different. It also might not know your source because you could have a custom source name or a source type or something like that. So that is not going to be included in your query. You need to put that in there yourself. For your seam, I know you're probably not sitting right next to your server, but when you just put in index equals star, source equals star, that server, that Splunk server is screaming back there in the server room. So try to be as specific as possible. Um, do you typically see the fields colon fields used? What I'm not sure. What do you mean? Can you put an example of that in there? Or where you're seeing that at? I'm not sure.
So he's talking about bringing in the left side tab fields directly to your search bar instead of in your table out.
Yeah, so the fields, I think that you're talking about in the actual like rule itself, you can put the fields in there. So like we do that for oh, you can't see where I'm putting. Let me close this so you can see my mouse. So like image is a field, original file name is a field. The event ID field is typically only used if you select the pipeline here. So if I go to sigconverter.io, it already has a rule over here. So if you select the pipeline and you go to like let's do sysmon here, it'll put that event ID field in there. That's just another way that it makes your search a little more concise to your environment. So if you don't have that in there, what this query will do now is it will look over all of your source types and all of your event codes to find this activity. But if you select Sentinel-1, for example, you see it just puts more specific pieces in there, so it's not as taxing on your search. You can be as again, it's it's your rule, so you can make it as specific or general as you would like. I would always start with a wide net. Start with that wide net and catch something, and then get more and more specific, kind of as you go and as you tune your rule. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? And then okay, awesome. And yeah, that image field is the image and parent image is the most common fields that I utilize in my detections of, that I make, right? I care about default. It runs with that problem. Yeah, I care about what image is creating what parent process is creating what. Um, Again, like I want to know if 7-zip was started by PowerShell that has a grandfather process of Word. I want to know about that, right? I want to know what's going on. And then so by default, it runs as dash dash without dash pipeline. Yes. So by default in SIG converter, if you don't select your pipeline, you don't have to. It will do it without the without that pipeline context in it. No, excuse me. All right. So image field in Windows sysmon logs common, or it may differ in different environments. Your image field, so back up. Seams are supposed, or seams and seam architects are supposed to utilize a standard format called CIM, which I don't remember what that stands for, but it's Common Information Model is what seam architects are supposed to utilize for your fields and your source types and things like that. What that project does is it's supposed to standardize what your fields and source types, etc., are across all environments and all logs. So the image field is what it is called in Sysmon, but I do see that some people that don't comply with the CIM standard or framework, whatever it's called, sometimes it'll be referred to as process or parent process or child process, um, but it should be parent image and image is like the standard CIM way to do it. So for each environment, sometimes the fields are a little different. Um, Ideally, everyone follows the same standard, but that's not always the case, right? So even with that, you may have to tune some of your rules if your organization does not follow that standard process. All right.
Yeah,
And
even tool to tool, it varies. Just wanted to touch on that again, where we saw it a lot where it'd be really weird and like say CS Falcon, it'll call it like image file name or parent image file name, or what was the other one? Is grandparent, I think,
grandparent.
which we thought was odd. And then sometimes, like depending on the initial setup, they're not even ingesting that data. So like they'll have all of the other stuff you'd typically expect to see about a process except that field. So it's a lot of understanding what you're ingesting yourself from your endpoints.
Yeah. I say, and an example of that. So like if we have it without the pipeline in there, it has an integrity level in there and some system and users and stuff like that. But if we throw in carbon black, you see that it changes what that field was. It changes it from integrity level to process integrity level. So that's what carbon black calls it. That's the reason for the pipeline if it is um, the default way for them to name it. Because even like I bet if I do Windows log sources, that didn't make any changes. Yeah, so like they have the event ID here that it puts that event ID in it. So it's all kind of different um, based off of what SIEM or EDR solution that you're utilizing. But if you follow the standard format that it's supposed to follow, it should automatically translate those for you. But maybe it won't, but it should. Um, Alrighty. So with that, like I said, not too much talking. I always underestimate how long I'm going to jabber on for, so it was longer than that 45 minutes, but still not too bad, just over an hour. So now we're gonna not break. Now we're gonna switch over to our lab. So in our lab, we have a victim machine, the SCYTHE platform, and Splunk installed. So Splunk is configured to ingest sysmon logs, script block logs, and your security event logs should be ingesting into Splunk. Um, so we're going to go into our lab. We're going to deploy a campaign, going to deploy a campaign, which is going to do the malicious actions that we're going to hunt on through SCYTHE. And then we're going to translate some Sigma rules and detect what happened, or ideally detect what happened, right? So everyone should have gotten a, again, a link over to the core stack. Once you go over to it, if you don't have an account, it might make you set a password. Just go ahead and set your password. It should take you to something like this. On the core stack intro page, we have the lovely Mr. Trey Bilbrey there, who made a little walkthrough to kind of show you each of the different pieces and how to utilize the systems. But the main thing you want to do is go over to systems here on the left, click this drop down, click start. That will start all of your machines. And then the only machine you should have to interact with is the Unicorn host, because you can reach Splunk and SCYTHE, and we're going to deploy the emulations right onto it. So go ahead and get your lab started. Might take a few minutes to turn on. Once the connect pops up for Unicorn host, hop in there, and then just start working on the lab. So we'll do maybe 15 minutes or so, and then we'll check in and see where everyone's at, and then we'll do some demos of the different pieces that we have. If it all makes sense and you can just go through it, feel free to just continue on. Take a break if you need it, and if any questions come up, please let us know. And see you guys in about 10-15 minutes, and we'll see where everyone's at.
I would say if you just started your lab, you've probably got a good 3, 4 minutes. Go ahead and take that time to stretch your legs, grab a drink, something like that. If you try to hop right into that unicorn host as soon as it starts, it might be a little sluggish on you. So I would recommend just taking a few minutes maybe to watch this intro video and stretch your legs.
Yeah, for sure. Because like Splunk and SCYTHE can take a few minutes to stand up as well. So Yeah, so say we'll do about 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll check back in. We have a question of how long will the lab be open. It should be about 4 hours that it should be open for. So the lab runs off of these credits. So you can see how many credits you have remaining up here. If you play your cards right, you can stop and start the machines to make the time go longer, but you shouldn't need to do that. The lab should be open for about 4 hours. If you do have to leave or go do something else, I would just stop all of these systems, and then when you hop on later, you can restart them and continue on.
We'll leave the entitlements up and open probably until midday tomorrow or tomorrow afternoon at some point. So you've got realistically all day today and tomorrow morning to use the credit hours you have.
All right, see everybody in about 10 minutes or so. Alrighty. Hey everybody, was everyone able to go in and create your Scythe campaigns and get those deployed out? Not yet. No problem. Let's say I'm just gonna do just to kind of walk through and how to do it. Okay, Edward's already moving through, getting to translating Sigma. Awesome. I said we're gonna do basically just we'll give it like 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, see where everyone's at, and then I'll demo a piece of it. But if you're good and you can go ahead and continue on your own. And then again, if anyone has any questions, just let us know. So getting into get my screen set up. Second. All right. So into creating some Scythe campaigns, we need some campaigns that show some adversary action, right? So we have that action in our logs. We can then test if our detections work. So from that, we can hop into Scythe, a little mark here, go to create campaign. I think it's meant to say first campaign, but I got ahead of myself and already made one, so I'll call this one first actual. The Windows HTTPS is fine with the defaults. And then in here, we're going to load some modules. The modules just help us like perform certain actions in Scythe, right? So we want to run ARP. We want print screen. So you can just type it in as well, print screen. And we want run. And then from that, we'll go down. We'll go to some of these already laid out actions it has here. So I know that we want to run print screen window. We want to run ARP. And we want to run who am I? In the run, you'll see this in the future steps as well, but run essentially is just like opening a command prompt, right? So it'll run whatever you want it to run as like command prompt or PowerShell. Again, you'll see some more options with that or some more examples of that in the next campaign. All right, so we have those loaded in, and we'll go up to adding in some attack techniques. So inside of Scythe, we have attack techniques mapped to the that come from the Atomic Red team, as well as some custom attacks that we have tied to the MITRE ATT&CK framework listed out here. So I'm going to run system time discovery. I just searched by the T code on the top. System time discovery. We want the top one, system time discovery. We'll configure that. Localhost is fine because we're going to run it on our local machine. Add those steps. So those should be added. And then you can save it as a threat if you'd like. Just give it a name. I'm just going to go ahead and create it. From there, the next step, we're going to download it as an executable. So we'll just click this drop-down link over here. Click download, executable, download client. You can also download it as a DLL if you would like, but not necessarily for this piece of the lab. Download unverified file. Gonna open up that file location, and then just gonna go ahead and run it. Run as admin. Run anyway. All right, so we'll let that run and go ahead and we should get a check-in here in a second. So see now it's gone to active. We get a little drop down. You can click the drop down, click on Unicorn host, which is our box. And as the steps run, we'll see them get loaded up here. So it's just loading some of the modules. We'll give it a few seconds to run all the way through. Going, we can see our screen here. So if you click the little drop down next to it, you can see the request and the response of what we get here. Run, who am I, administrator, run system time. Okay, that's what we were waiting for. So then for the next step, we'll go in. We have a Sigma rule that is listed out here. That is designed to detect system time lookup. So we'll go ahead and copy that, and we'll open up Sig Converter or uncoder.io if you would like to. I prefer Sig Converter. We have some challenge questions in there as well for you guys to answer. If you need some help with those, please let me know. Side of that, we can throw our rule over here on the left, and then we see that it has it all tabled out over here. We'll go ahead and give that a copy. Head over to Splunk, search and reporting. And then we'll go ahead and just paste that rule in there. Because this is a lab environment, all the stuff I was saying about specifying your host name or not host name, but your index and sources and stuff. You can, but it's not necessary because again, it's just the lab environment. It's not a big deal, but if you want to, you can set that and then do a search, and we can see, boom, that the command line does pop up. So we know that this detection, which is set to hit on, let me switch back to the rule. We can all see what I'm looking at. The rule here needs the command line to contain both /c as well as time, and the image has to end with CMD. And if we go back to Splunk, we can see that in the command line, and I'll table the image as well. So we see that the image ends with CMD, and that the command line contains that / as well as time. So we see we've proven through threat emulation, adversary emulation, that this rule does work, right? And then some of the challenge questions we have here ask us what MITRE attack technique is referenced in the Sigma rule. The attack technique we could see right down here is T1124, which you can also just copy this whole thing and give it a quick Google. Should take you right to MITRE attack for system time discovery under, I believe, under the discovery tactic. And then which explains what our rule will alert on. Our rule is going to alert on the process creation, just like it says here, process creation of cmd.exe, which then runs the command line arguments that have to include /c as well as time. Is there any questions on that? All right. So this, I actually just realized that I went a little ahead of what I told you guys to go ahead and do, but that'll be the first two sections for deploying a threat with Scythe, as well as using community created rules, which is what we did. So the next part is going to be writing detections. So in this, I'll just show how to create that Sigma or weaponizing Sigma threat real quick. So in here, campaign name, weaponizing Sigma, you could call it whatever you would like. Windows HTTPS is fine for our parameters. Going to add existing threats. So inside of the existing threat dropdown we have here is all of the threat emulations, not all of the threat emulations, but our threat emulations that we have on the Scythe platform. So when you're done with kind of these precursors, there's some additional detection opportunities where you can run these other campaigns, create your own campaigns, things like that. But for this one, we're going to go to weaponizing Sigma, add steps. And over here, you see all the steps that are loaded. They're all tagged to MITRE attack. Go ahead and create the campaign, and then we're going to download and execute it the same way. So click the drop down, click download, download as an exe. Gonna allow it. We don't mind that it's unverified. As well, and open this, and then right click, run as administrator. Go ahead and run it. All right, and then that will get you, you should receive a check-in for that. Once all of those have run down, we have some detection opportunities that we have listed out. So two of the pieces that this weaponizing Sigma threat will run is downloading a file from the internet via PowerShell, as well as modifying the run keys. So I would encourage you to use that kind of template that we have listed out in the manual. You only need to modify the detection section. You don't worry about all the other stuff. You can just modify the detection section. It should be good enough to translate. If you want to go ahead and try your hand at creating some custom Sigma rules or tests, or if not, we have some examples underneath that you can translate and put into Splunk to see what was hit on and what wasn't. You can also, if you don't want to use the examples, utilize Sigma HQ, utilize detection.fyi, things like that, and try to find rules on your own. And then after that, we get into configuring alerts, and then we have some additional detection opportunities there. So it's not too much else that's really needed from us as instructors. It's really your guys' time to go ahead and play with the Sigma rules, find your own rules, create your rules, deploy some threats, things like that. See that calc just popped up. That's part of the threat emulation. So I'll give it about 20 minutes or so and just see how everyone's doing. Again, if you have any questions or need anything, please let me know. I'll be here waiting for it. All right. Hello again, everybody. How's everyone doing? We dropped in the chat the CPE for this workshop. If you guys need that, typically we have it built into the manual, but this is our first time running this on the new platform, and I forgot. So, so have the Google Drive link of the PDF there if you need it, as well as Trey had dropped our Discord channel for Scythe. Just collaborate. We talk about the workshops in there, some other stuff that we put out. If you are interested in joining, but this I think we'll go over the next piece of it for the writing detections. How did everybody do? Anybody get results that they were expecting? To get anything unexpected? What how did it go? Did anyone write any custom rules, or did you just use the examples, or go to Sigma HQ or something to curate them? We kind of give you a half clue to the first one, but over the first one. So inside of like I was showing, inside of Scythe, you're able to kind of cheat the detection process a little bit, because you can see what command line arguments and images that the implant is running. So if you just click on Weaponizing Sigma, I'll check this box here and then expand so we can see all of them and see what it's doing. So the first example or detection I had wanted you to make was for a file that was downloaded from the internet via PowerShell. And if you went to the example and pulled it down, PowerShell web download, we could see here that it's looking for the process creation of something. It doesn't say what image it is, but it's got some command line arguments here, which are typical of PowerShell to download something. So download string, download file, invoke web request, and IWR with that space in it. IWR, again, is just an alias for invoke web request. So if we take that and copy it, and then go over to Splunk and see, I already did it, and run it, we don't get anything back. Does anybody know why? Or have an idea why? You don't have to know. You can just think. No takers? That's all right. I will show you. So, um, we have in here two ways that we've downloaded something um, from the internet using PowerShell. So we have this one here, which runs Upshell. Upshell is our unmanaged PowerShell variant. So it calls for PowerShell by running the System Automation Management DLL instead of actually running PowerShell.exe. So the logging is a little different. You would need to have additional logging in place or in-memory execution to be placed. This is why we like to highlight, the state-based detections instead of just querying on the command line. Because in here we can see that the command line has download file built right into it, so it should hit off of it, but because it's performed in a different way, not just through the command line, it's not logged the same. So that's one reason why that didn't hit. The other reason, if you look, one of the first campaigns, or one of the first steps here, we download AnyDesk to our wherever you ran the executable in. So it should be in downloads if that's where it was downloaded and executed from. So why didn't our rule hit on this or catch this? Well, the reason for that is that our rule, or our command, is running wget, not invoke web request or IWR. So for that, we see that our rule is so specific that we missed some of the detection pieces. So in here, if we do wget and rerun it, we should get a hit. And then we can do a favorite stats value, image or command line by image, parent image. And we could see here that weaponizing Sigma executable, which is our implant of our campaign, spawned, which then spawned PowerShell, which then ran this wget command to download AnyDesk. So the first one was really an example of making sure that your detection is broad enough to catch more than what you think it might do. I mean, you could see in here those two examples of how you can easily bypass some of these detections by making them too specific, or just by doing something on the threat emulation side, doing something a little bit differently, like using that unmanaged PowerShell. Um, so in that, all we had to do was just add the wget to it, and then we get the results that we expect. And on the secondary one, we have modifications to the run keys. So the run keys, for those that don't know, are values in the registry that will run a process or executable, or it will run something whenever the system is rebooted or when a user logs in, depending on which run key you have it set to. So a very typical way to enable persistence from an adversary perspective. Excuse me. So in here, we can just copy, paste our rule on the left, grab it on the right, and I'm going to leave. I'm not going to leave because the rule has the table in there, and run this, and we'll see what we get. So this comes back. We can see that the parent command line argument and the command line argument there. I'm going to change the table. I prefer the stats values, command line, parent image, and then table, parent image, values of command line. That just puts it in the right order. So we see here again that the parent image of CMD spawned reg.exe, and then from reg.exe we have our command line argument here for them setting the run key to atomic red team, which would then run atomic red team.exe. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody get a similar result to that? All right. And then they had some challenge questions there. If you have any issues on those, please let me know. And then the last part that we're going to go over before you're back on independent time is just that configuring of alerts. So how we were saying that if your level of your Sigma rule, switch back to this one. So your level here, this is a medium, so it doesn't need a dedicated alert. But if you do have a detection that is a high or critical level, you're going to want to create alerts to notify you as soon as this detection piece is hit, right? So in our example, we're just doing it off of Who Am I? This is just to show you how to create an alert and kind of how to utilize it. So you are going to run your query, which in our example is again just Who am I? You can see that we do have some hits, which is great. So we're like, okay, this is a high fidelity detection that we have. We want to be alerted on this as soon as somebody does it for whatever reason. So we're going to go into save as. We're going to save this as an alert. We're going to give it a name. We'll call this Who am I alert. You know, you want your alerts and descriptions to be well worded and verbose. So one's not super verbose. You probably want to have some reasons in your description of like Who am I is utilized by XYZ or whatever your detection is. A great piece of the Sigma rules actually used for this is just to grab that description right off of your Sigma rule. So it should already have some context in it. But either way, then we'll do shared in app. We're going to have it scheduled. We want it to run on a cron schedule. The reason for this is just so it runs constantly, just for the lab. In real life, in your real environment, you might want it to run overnight or once a week or something like that. Totally up to you. we'll do the cron job here, which is 5 asterisks, which basically means run every minute forever. Have this expire in 24 hours. We want it if the number of results is greater than 0. So any hits at all, we want to know about it. You could have some conditional arguments in here, like if you are only concerned if you see this more than 5 times or something like that. And then trigger actions, we want to add it to triggered alerts. You can set the severity there. You see it's in a very similar format to the Sigma rule itself. Excuse me. So we want it to be critical, and then we will save it. Here we can view the alert. So this will only do it from when the alert is created on. So it won't alert on anything previously that happened, but that's okay because we can go ahead and open PowerShell and run who am I? Run CMD who am I? Just run 2 of them. And then from there, be able to refresh the page. Might take a minute. Give it a second for it to catch up. Give it a minute to run. And then while we are just doing the alerts for Splunk, all SIEMs have a very similar functionality where you can set up an alert. You do it basically the same way where you have it, you run a query and then you save it as an alert and then you get notified whenever it runs. All right, so I think enough time has gone by. I'll go back to alerts. Who am I? And then here we see that we got a result. So you can also set these up to email you or a push notification or something like that if you want to know immediately. I think I see most often that people will have these set to email them. They have these run overnight or something, and then email for the real detections of concern. And then we can view results, and what that will do is essentially run the query again within that specified time frame, and then let you know what it was hit on. So pretty straightforward as far as the detection, or as far as the alerting piece is concerned. We just wanted to show how you can again operationalize these Sigma rules and detection rules to provide you some real time value of what's going on, right? And then from that, it goes into some additional detection opportunities. So inside of that, we have some additional threats such as the Conti V2, Phobos, and the option to just run your own threat, run whatever you would like. Again, inside of SCYTHE, you can do that very easily. Just go SCYTHE, create campaign, give it a name, leave the defaults, and then you can add the existing threats. Like I said, the Conti V2 or Phobos. I think Volt Typhoon might be on here. Volt Typhoon is on there. Other ransomware. If you want to test for specific tactics or techniques, you can go ahead and do it via the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. One way I recommend you can do it is to go to Sigma HQ and find a rule that you're interested in. Find a rule that is of concern to you. Find something that you want to know how to, can you detect this? Can you see this? Right? Like treat this like it's your own environment, and really just kind of play around with the threat emulation and the detection piece. This lab environment is isolated and your own, so you can run whatever you want. I mean, you could even just open up PowerShell and run, evil.exe, whatever it is that you want to run. It is totally up to you. But with that, I'll put you guys back on your own kind of independent time going forward. I'll stick around for probably another 20-30 minutes or so in case anybody has questions. But other than that, you guys are on your own time. Thank you for hopping on. Again, if you have any questions or anything, please let me know or reach out. Yeah, hopefully everybody got something out of this, and hope to see you on future workshops. Thanks a lot. Yeah, hey Delaney. The copy paste um functionality, I guess. The copy paste should just work from the manual into your Unicorn host box. You might be prompted to like allow redirection, like allow copy paste redirection or clipboard redirection, but it should just work. We have seen that if people are on like their work laptop or something like that, that they might be restricted from running from copy pasting between the browsers, but as long as you allow it, it should work. You could also just try to refresh the entire browser. It's these you connect to the machines through a guacamole instance, and sometimes it just gets hung up, so you just have to refresh the whole browser. All right. Hey again, everybody. Just wanted to do one more check-in, make sure everybody was doing all right. Got a couple more minutes, and then Trey and I are gonna hop off, and the lab will be yours to do whatever you would like. All right. Well, I don't see anything in the chat, so I'm gonna assume that everything is going swimmingly. Um, yeah. Hopefully everybody enjoyed the workshop and got something out of it that you can take back and help improve, your own detections or utilize Sigma a little bit more. Um, yeah, thanks everybody for hopping on, and hopefully we will see you in the future. I think our next workshop is we're going to go through how to um, emulate Black Suit ransomware, which used to be Royal ransomware. So we're going to show you like from gathering CTI to putting it all together, creating the threat emulation, actually deploying the threat emulation, and then maybe if we have time, go through how to detect some of those actions. That I believe is maybe the second week in March. I think, but you can find the info for that in the same place as you found this one on scythe.io/workshops. Yeah, hope everybody had a good time and hope to see you on the next one.